He had always lived a life of quiet routine. Every morning he would wake before the sun, stretch his muscles, and take a long walk around the neighborhood, greeting those he passed with a polite nod or a warm smile. He was known to his neighbors as a calm, dependable presence, the kind of person who would lend a hand without needing to be asked. Few would suspect that beneath this calm exterior lay a man whose past was filled with missions and experiences that most people could barely imagine. But he never spoke of it. Those days were behind him, and he preferred the peace of his current life. That evening began like any other. He had returned from work, cleaned up, and was preparing a simple dinner in his small apartment. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside formed the comforting soundtrack of his evening. He was about to sit down with a plate of food when there was a loud knock at the door. It was sharp and insistent, carrying the weight of authority. Before he could react, several officers barged in. Confused and taken off guard, he raised his hands, trying to understand what was happening. They claimed he was under arrest for a crime he had no part in. He tried to explain, his voice steady but firm, but the officers seemed uninterested in his words. They cuffed him and read him his rights, moving with practiced efficiency. He didn't resist. He knew that fighting them would only make things worse, and he had learned long ago that control and patience often mattered more than brute strength. The ride to the police station was tense, but silent. He sat with his hands cuffed, observing the world outside through the car window. He had been in countless high-stress situations in his life, and yet this felt different. There was a vulnerability here he hadn't felt in years, a sense of being entirely at the mercy of circumstances beyond his control. He reminded himself to remain calm, to observe, and to plan. It was a habit ingrained deeply, a habit that had kept him alive in far more dangerous situations than this. At the station, the process was mechanical. Fingerprints, mugshots, questioning. He answered the questions with the same clarity and composure he had maintained his entire life. Every movement, every word was measured. He knew that panic or anger would only work against him. Still, the sense of injustice weighed on him. How had a simple mistake led to this? How had an ordinary night spiraled into this nightmare? After hours of processing, he was escorted to a prison transport vehicle. The reality of his situation began to sink in. He was being sent to a facility known for its strict rules and dangerous population. He had been trained to face threats in countless forms, but this was a different kind of challenge. Here, the rules were written by fear and power, and respect was something earned, often through demonstrations of strength or cunning. The ride to the prison was long, giving him ample time to observe his surroundings and consider his next steps. He studied the guards, noting their routines and mannerisms. He noticed the expressions of the other prisoners in the transport, some anxious, some resigned, and others curious. He understood that every individual in this situation was a puzzle, a set of behaviors and reactions to be understood. This awareness had always been part of him, honed over years of rigorous training and life-threatening missions. When they arrived, the prison loomed like a fortress. Its high walls, watchtowers, and barbed fences were designed to intimidate, and for many it succeeded. But he felt a calm focus settle over him. He had faced greater dangers before, and he understood that fear could be controlled. He stepped out of the vehicle with measured steps, head held high, eyes scanning, every sense alert. He was entering a world full of threats, but he was not unprepared. The intake process inside the prison was swift but thorough. He was stripped of personal items, given a uniform, and shown to his cell. It was small, stark, and cold, but it was just another environment to navigate. He took in the details: the placement of the bed, the strength of the bars, the visibility of the guards. Every observation was stored in his mind. He understood that knowledge was power, even in a place like this. The other inmates were already settling into the routines of prison life. Some noticed him immediately, whispering and watching. He could feel the subtle assessments being made, the way they measured his size, his posture, his expressions. In his quiet way, he began observing them in return, noting those who seemed aggressive, those who sought to avoid trouble, and those who moved with calculated confidence. He had learned long ago that understanding people was often more important than understanding weapons. Within the first few days, it became clear that certain groups had claimed dominance over parts of the prison. Gangs, hardened by their own experiences and seeking to assert control, began testing newcomers. It was subtle at first. A comment here, a shove there, an attempt to provoke. He maintained his calm, never overreacting, never showing fear. But inside, he was analyzing every action, planning for potential encounters, without letting anyone suspect the depth of his abilities. Despite the threats, he did not isolate himself. He observed the dynamics, learned the schedules, and found moments to engage in small, seemingly innocuous interactions. He helped with minor tasks, offered advice when asked, and spoke in a tone that was steady and measured. Slowly, he began to understand the rhythm of the place. This knowledge, combined with his natural discipline, allowed him to navigate the dangerous waters without drawing undue attention. The first real confrontation came quietly. A member of one of the dominant gangs approached him in the cafeteria, making a thinly veiled threat. He responded with calm words, showing neither fear nor aggression. He maintained eye contact, projecting an inner strength that the man could not ignore. The encounter ended without physical violence, but he knew the message had been delivered. He was not an easy target. At night, in the solitude of his cell, he reflected on the irony of his situation. The man who had faced enemy combatants, extreme conditions, and life-or-death scenarios in foreign lands was now facing a different kind of challenge in a place he had never imagined. Yet the principles remained the same: patience, observation, and careful action. He had always believed that true strength lay not in showing force, but in knowing when and how to use it. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by distant sounds of commotion, shouting, and the occasional clanging of metal. Yet even in this environment, he found moments of clarity. He visualized routines, imagined potential scenarios, and rehearsed responses in his mind. This mental preparation had been a cornerstone of his life, and it now served him well in the harsh reality of prison life. In the coming days, he would be tested further. The gang had noticed his calm demeanor and subtle confidence. Whispers began to circulate, speculation about his past, about what kind of man could remain so composed in a place designed to break people. He did not encourage these rumors, nor did he reveal anything. His life had always been defined by action, not words, and he intended to continue that tradition. For now, he focused on the present. Each meal, each movement, each interaction was an opportunity to understand the environment, to prepare and to survive. He understood that time was a powerful ally, and patience would serve him better than aggression. And so, he moved through his days with quiet determination, aware that the true test of his character and skill was only beginning. The prison walls may have contained him physically, but his mind remained free, sharp, and ready for whatever came next. The first week in prison was a learning experience unlike any he had faced before. Every day brought a new challenge, a new observation, and a reminder that he was no longer in control of the environment around him. The cells were crowded, the air thick with tension, and the sounds of aggression echoed through the hallways at all hours. He had faced life-threatening situations abroad, but here, danger came not from the battlefield, but from the people around him. From the very beginning, certain inmates had taken notice of him. His calm demeanor and the way he carried himself set him apart from others who reacted quickly to fear or provocation. A group of men hardened by years inside these walls began testing him. Small acts of intimidation, like blocking his path in the hallway or cutting in line, were their way of gauging how he would respond. He knew these tests were not about the act itself, but about establishing power. He stayed composed, responding with polite but firm words, never raising his voice, never showing fear. Each interaction was a chance to study their behavior, to understand what drove them, and to anticipate their next move. Meals in the cafeteria were some of the most intense moments of the day. In this confined space, every gesture, glance, and movement was scrutinized. The gang that had started targeting him made it clear that they wanted to mark their territory. One day, a man tried to spill his drink as he walked by. He caught it, Mid-air, with a steady hand, looked the man in the eye and quietly said, "Careful, that could have hit someone else." The cafeteria fell silent for a moment, and the would-be aggressor stepped back, surprised by the calmness and precision of the response. It was the first small sign that this man was not someone to be pushed around easily. As days passed, he began mapping the prison in his mind. He noticed the guard rota, tie-ins, the blind spots, the corners where fights were more likely to happen, and the routines of the gang leaders. Knowledge gave him power, and he moved with purpose even when he appeared to be doing nothing at all. He found small moments to exercise, to maintain his strength and focus. The routines of the prison could have been oppressive, but he turned them into opportunities for observation and preparation. The gang began to escalate their efforts. They cornered him in the yard one afternoon, attempting to intimidate him with verbal threats and physical gestures. He stood still, never raising his voice, never making sudden movements. His calmness unnerved them. In his past, he had faced far greater dangers, but here, patience was his weapon. The standoff ended without violence, but he could sense the anger in the men. They respected his composure, but were frustrated that he had not reacted the way most prisoners would. Despite the constant tension, he made an effort to understand the people around him. He spoke quietly with those who were willing to talk, learning about their stories, their fears, and the unwritten rules of prison life. He never offered judgment, only listening. In this way, he began to build a quiet network of awareness. People started noticing him not just as someone calm, but as someone thoughtful, someone who could assess situations accurately. This network of observation would be crucial in the days to come. One evening, while lying on his bunk, he reflected on the irony of his situation. He had trained his mind and body for situations that demanded immediate action and decision-making under extreme stress. Yet here, the challenge was patience and subtlety. The stakes were different, but the principle remained the same. Awareness, strategy, and timing could save lives. He reminded himself that strength was not always about direct confrontation. Sometimes it was about knowing when to act and when to wait. As the gang realized that intimidation was not working, they shifted their tactics. Small possessions began to disappear. Whispers of rumors spread, and he could feel the subtle manipulation of the prison politics. It was a mental game as much as a physical one. He responded with the same quiet observation, noting patterns and potential threats. He learned to move through the prison with a low profile, while simultaneously understanding the motivations of those around him. He also noticed moments of humanity amidst the harshness. Some prisoners were simply trying to survive, and he offered quiet words of advice or small gestures of kindness when possible. These actions were not about winning favor, but about maintaining his sense of self in a place designed to strip it away. By remaining true to his principles, he began to create a personal code that others could sense, even if they did not understand it fully. The guards, too, began to take notice. They observed his composure, his refusal to react impulsively, and his ability to navigate tense situations without incident. While most prisoners were quick to anger or submission, he maintained a calm equilibrium that even authority figures found noteworthy. In his own quiet way, he was establishing a reputation without announcing it, letting his actions speak louder than words ever could. Tension reached a peak one day when a member of the gang confronted him directly in the hallway. The man had clearly intended to provoke a fight, but the calm man simply stopped, made steady eye contact, and said, "If you want to make this worse, that's your choice." There was no anger, no threat in his tone, just a simple statement of reality. The man backed down, unsure of how to respond to someone who exuded quiet confidence without aggression. He understood, however, that this was only the beginning. The gang would continue testing him, and others might attempt to take advantage of the situation. He continued to observe, to learn, and to prepare. Each encounter added to his understanding of the social dynamics and the unspoken rules that governed this environment. He realized that his survival depended not just on strength, but on intelligence, perception, and patience. At night, he would lie on his bunk and replay the day in his mind. He analyzed interactions, considered alternative strategies, and mentally rehearsed potential scenarios. This practice had been second nature to him in the past, and now it served as a crucial tool for survival. In this way, he transformed the oppressive environment into a place of controlled observation, turning the chaos around him into structured knowledge. He also noticed the psychological patterns of the gang members. Their aggression was often a mask for insecurity, a way to maintain control in an environment that demanded constant assertion of power. By understanding their motivations, he could anticipate actions before they happened. This insight allowed him to maintain the upper hand without revealing the full extent of his capabilities. While he never sought confrontation, he also never backed down from necessary boundaries. This delicate balance earned him subtle respect from other inmates, even those not directly involved in the gang dynamics. Some began to see him as a quiet force, someone whose presence commanded attention without the need for threats or violence. It was a different kind of power, one rooted in discipline, awareness, and self-control. As the second week drew to a close, he realized that survival in this place required more than physical ability. It required mental agility, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience. He continued to navigate the delicate social structures, always observing, always learning, and always preparing for the challenges ahead. The initial fear and uncertainty had been replaced by a focused determination. He understood that the prison would test him in ways unlike any battlefield he had faced before, but he was ready. Through all of this, he remained aware of a simple truth. True strength was not in proving oneself through brute force, but in understanding the environment, controlling reactions, and choosing the right moment to act. He knew that his skills, honed through years of discipline and experience, would serve him when the time came. Until then, patience and observation were his weapons, and he wielded them with quiet mastery. By the end of this part of his journey, the foundation was laid. The man who had once operated in secret, executing dangerous missions in foreign lands, was now navigating the subtle and deadly politics of a prison. His presence alone began to shift the balance of power, even if no one yet knew why. He was calm, composed, and vigilant, a figure who could survive in a world designed to break people, and deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning of a test that would challenge every part of him, physically, mentally, and morally. The tension on the quiet street reached its peak, as the officer's suspicion clashed with the man's calm composure. After long minutes of silence and careful observation, the man realized it was time to reveal a crucial truth that could change the direction of the encounter. He drew a steady breath and spoke in a firm, calm voice. "Officer, there is something important you need to know. I am not an ordinary citizen. I am an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I am currently engaged in a sensitive operation." The officer froze, his expression unreadable for a moment. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. He blinked several times, trying to process what he had just heard. The suspicion in his eyes was mixed now with disbelief. "You're joking," he said cautiously, his tone edged with uncertainty. The man shook his head, his face composed and serious. "I am not joking, officer. I understand how unusual this may seem, but I am prepared to show you proof." The officer's hand twitched near his belt, a reflex born of years on duty, but the man's calm presence prevented him from escalating the situation further. The man reached slowly into his pocket and produced his identification, holding it carefully so the officer could see it without feeling threatened. The silver badge and credentials caught the dim streetlight, and the officer's eyes widened slightly as he read the official designation. "FBI?" the officer asked, his voice a mixture of astonishment and caution. "Yes," the man replied calmly. "I am working on a case that requires confidentiality. I understand why this might appear suspicious, but I assure you, there is no threat here." The officer's posture softened slightly, though tension still lingered in his shoulders. The realization that he had been confronting an FBI agent who was calm, composed, and clearly in control of the situation left him momentarily speechless. The man continued to speak, his voice steady and deliberate. "I respect your role and your authority. I am showing you my credentials to prevent any misunderstanding and to ensure that we both handle this situation safely and professionally." The officer, still processing the revelation, looked down at the badge again and then back at the man. His mind raced, trying to reconcile his initial assumptions with the new reality. For a moment, silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of distant traffic. The man's calm authority created a space where the officer could reconsider his actions without losing face. The man remained patient, knowing that this pause was crucial for de-escalation. He kept his hands visible, his stance relaxed, yet his presence commanded respect. The officer's voice was quieter now, tinged with embarrassment and confusion. I didn't know, he admitted, his tone less harsh than before. I misjudged the situation. The man nodded slightly, maintaining a respectful demeanor. I understand, officer. Assumptions can be dangerous. It is important to always approach situations fairly and without bias. There was no accusation in his words, only a calm reminder of the principles that guided justice. The officer rubbed the back of his neck, his earlier bravado replaced by a mix of guilt and reflection. He glanced at the man's vehicle and then back at him, a subtle acknowledgement that he had acted hastily. You handled this well, he said finally, his tone more measured. Most people would have panicked or argued. The man smiled faintly, appreciating the officer's attempt to recognize his composure. Calmness can prevent misunderstandings, officer. It is not about being fearless, but about remaining clear-headed and respectful under pressure. The street around them remained quiet, the soft glow of the streetlights casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. The night air seemed to hold its breath as if aware of the gravity of the moment. The man's calm presence had shifted the energy, turning what could have been a dangerous confrontation into a controlled, informative exchange. The officer's voice wavered slightly as he spoke again. Why didn't you say anything earlier? I could have called this in and we might have handled it differently. The man nodded, his expression serious. I wanted to give you a chance to assess the situation without assumptions. Revealing my role too soon can also create risks for ongoing operations. I hope you can understand that. The officer's gaze softened as he considered the explanation, realizing the careful balance the man had maintained between authority and safety. The man continued, taking a slow, deliberate breath. I understand why you were cautious. I respect your responsibilities. But it is equally important to ensure that caution does not turn into prejudice or unfair treatment. We are all human, and mistakes can happen when assumptions guide actions instead of facts. The officer's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in his jaw easing. He seemed to be reflecting on his own behavior, acknowledging the danger of letting personal bias interfere with professional duty. The man's voice remained steady, reinforcing the lessons embedded in the moment. I hope this encounter can serve as a reminder that respect, patience, and calm observation can prevent unnecessary harm. Even in high-pressure situations, fairness and humanity must guide actions. The officer nodded slowly, visibly affected by the clarity and wisdom in the man's words. It was clear that this interaction would linger in his thoughts long after the night ended. The officer then spoke, his voice quieter and more thoughtful. I need to report this to make sure my actions are documented properly. The man agreed, handing over the badge again for verification. Of course, officer. Transparency is important. I want to ensure there is no confusion or misinterpretation of events. The officer studied the credentials carefully, double-checking the authenticity and making mental notes for his report. As the officer made a call on his radio, the man stepped back, giving him space to complete the communication. The situation had shifted entirely. What began as a tense and potentially hostile encounter was now a controlled interaction rooted in respect, patience, and clarity. The officer's body language had softened and his tone was more professional, reflecting a new awareness of his earlier behavior. The man observed the officer discreetly, noting the subtle changes in demeanor. He understood that this moment was as much about teaching and learning as it was about clearing suspicion. His calm, steady presence had not only prevented escalation, but had also provided a human lesson in fairness and respect. The officer hung up the radio and turned to face the man. Everything checks out, he said, a hint of relief in his voice. I overreacted. I should have approached this differently. The man nodded, accepting the acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the first step toward improvement, officer. Reflecting on our actions helps prevent similar situations in the future. The night continued quietly, the city sounds a distant hum. The man prepared to leave, ready to return to his duties while understanding the lingering impact of the encounter. The officer watched him with a mixture of respect and newfound awareness, the tension replaced with a contemplative silence. There was a sense that both men had gained something from the interaction, a subtle but powerful shift in perspective. As the man walked toward his vehicle, he spoke one last time. Officer, thank you for listening and for handling this with professionalism once the truth was revealed. It is a reminder that patience and respect can guide even the most difficult moments. The officer nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that the encounter had been transformative, a rare lesson learned in the course of duty. The man entered his car and started the engine, the soft hum breaking the silence of the street. He drove away slowly, aware that the night had been a mix of danger, tension, and profound human interaction. The officer remained standing by the roadside, reflecting on the events and silently acknowledging the lessons learned. The night had changed something within him, a reminder that fairness and humanity must always guide authority, and that assumptions, especially those influenced by bias, can have serious consequences. As the man disappeared into the distance, the streetlights continued their quiet watch. The officer stayed for a moment longer, collecting his thoughts and preparing to file the necessary reports. The experience would stay with him, a lasting reminder of the unexpected turns life can take, and the importance of remaining fair, patient, and human even in situations fraught with tension. The night returned to its quiet rhythm, but the echoes of the encounter lingered in the minds of both men, a lesson in respect, calmness, and the careful balance between authority and humanity. Both had learned something invaluable: the power of composure, the danger of assumptions, and the profound impact that a single interaction can have when approached with understanding and integrity. The days after the encounter weighed heavily on the officer. He could not stop replaying the events in his mind, each detail feeling sharper and more significant than it had in the moment. Every turn he took on the city streets reminded him of how quickly assumptions could turn dangerous. Each stop he made carried the quiet echo of that night, a reminder that his approach to his job could have serious consequences. He felt an uncomfortable mixture of guilt, shame, and a growing determination to change. He started arriving at the station earlier than usual, going through paperwork slowly, double-checking every detail, and observing his own behavior critically. During briefings, he listened more than he spoke, noticing how his colleagues interacted with the public and how he had acted in comparison. Even minor exchanges with co-workers prompted reflection. Was he treating everyone fairly? Was he letting unconscious assumptions guide him? He realized he needed more than just internal reflection. He needed action. At first, the change was subtle. He adjusted his tone when speaking with the public, made a conscious effort to keep his body language neutral, and focused on fully understanding the circumstances before making judgments. He practiced patience, reminding himself of the man he had encountered and how calm composure had shifted the entire situation. It became a personal mission to emulate that calm, measured approach, while still maintaining authority. He took time to review past encounters, mentally replaying them, identifying moments where assumptions might have influenced his decisions. Some were minor, some more serious, and he realized that bias could creep in even when he thought he was fair. He took notes, reflecting on how to handle similar situations differently in the future. He started keeping a journal, documenting his thoughts, reactions, and lessons from every significant interaction. Writing became a form of accountability, forcing him to confront his own mistakes and think through better choices. The officer began attending training sessions, not just the mandatory ones, but additional workshops focused on communication, empathy, and understanding unconscious bias. He participated actively, asking questions, listening carefully, and thinking about how the lessons applied to his daily work. He began discussing approaches with more experienced officers, learning new ways to de-escalate situations without letting assumptions dictate his actions. Slowly, he could see how these lessons could reshape the way he approached every stop and interaction. At home, he struggled with reflection. He thought about the fear that could have escalated if the man had reacted differently, the subtle ways that power and authority could harm someone unfairly. These thoughts were uncomfortable but necessary. He acknowledged that growth often came from facing discomfort, not avoiding it. He used these reflections to prepare mentally for the next day, reminding himself that fairness and humanity were not optional. They were essential. The FBI agent he had encountered also remained in his mind, not just for the revelation of identity, but for the professionalism and composure he displayed. The officer admired the discipline it must have taken to stay calm in the face of hostility and misunderstanding. He realized that respect and patience could not only prevent escalation, but also teach valuable lessons about human interaction and fairness. It was a lesson he would carry with him constantly. His colleagues noticed the change. Some were supportive, some indifferent, and others skeptical, but he persisted quietly. He shared reflections when appropriate, emphasizing fairness, patience, and communication, hoping that even small shifts could create a safer, more respectful culture in the department. He learned that personal growth could influence a larger environment, and that leadership came in many forms, including leading by example. Community interactions became a priority. He started attending neighborhood meetings and public forums, engaging respectfully, listening actively, and demonstrating a commitment to fairness and safety. He shared lessons without disclosing sensitive details, emphasizing the importance of calm, respectful engagement in every encounter. The community noticed the difference, small as it was, and trust began to grow, a slow but tangible reminder of the impact of responsible policing. During patrols, every stop became an exercise in mindfulness. He consciously slowed his responses, monitored his tone, maintained neutral body language, and made sure to communicate clearly and respectfully. Each encounter reminded him that assumptions could have serious consequences and that fairness required active effort, not just passive awareness. Over time, this approach began to feel natural, a reflection of the lessons he had internalized from that one transformative night. In quieter moments, he reflected on the broader societal implications. He thought about those who faced racial profiling without the advantage of experience or authority. He acknowledged his own responsibility to mitigate harm whenever possible and to hold himself accountable even when no one was watching. These reflections deepened his empathy and strengthened his resolve to act with fairness and integrity consistently. He began mentoring new recruits, sharing insights about communication, patience, and bias awareness. He emphasized the importance of listening, observing, and understanding before acting. Through mentorship, he could influence the next generation of officers, helping to cultivate a culture that valued fairness, respect, and humanity over assumptions and haste. Each conversation with a recruit reinforced his own learning and reminded him of the long-term impact one person could have. As months passed, he noticed a tangible change in his approach and mindset. He was more deliberate in actions, more thoughtful in decisions, and more aware of the subtle dynamics that could escalate situations. Supervisors commented on his professionalism and composure, and he took their feedback seriously, continuously seeking to improve. The lessons of the night with the FBI agent had become integrated into his professional identity, shaping his behavior in ways that were evident to those around him. He also began reflecting on his own personal life, considering how bias and assumptions affected interactions outside of work. This self-awareness influenced his behavior in social settings, making him more patient, empathetic, and considerate. The officer realized that growth was holistic, affecting both professional and personal spheres, and that one informed the other in meaningful ways. He would sometimes return mentally to the street where it all began, picturing the quiet night, the flashing lights, and the calm presence of the FBI agent. The memory was a reminder of what could have gone wrong, but also of the power of composure, patience, and respectful communication. It became a symbol of accountability, personal growth, and the responsibility inherent in authority. Each recollection reinforced the principles he now lived by and shared with others. The city carried on, unaware of the personal transformation taking place within one officer. Streets bustled during the day, quieted at night, but the lessons of that night remained alive in his mind. Every interaction, every decision was an opportunity to apply the insights gained. The officer understood that true professionalism required constant self-reflection and commitment to fairness, no matter how ordinary or routine the moment appeared. By the end of the year, he had documented a series of personal and professional improvements in his journal. He reviewed incidents, analyzed his responses, and noted growth in communication, empathy, and judgment. He recognized that accountability was an ongoing process, and that each day offered a new chance to reinforce fairness and respect. The encounter had transformed not just his approach to policing, but his understanding of responsibility, humanity, and the importance of integrity. The officer realized that mistakes were inevitable, but growth and learning were deliberate choices. The night with the FBI agent had become a touchstone, a reminder of the consequences of bias and the transformative power of calm, respectful interaction. He carried these lessons forward, guiding his decisions, interactions, and reflections, ensuring that each moment offered the possibility of positive impact and understanding. Months had passed since the night that changed everything for the officer. The memory of the encounter with the FBI agent remained vivid, a constant reminder of the importance of fairness, patience, and calmness in every interaction. The lessons he had learned were no longer theoretical. They had become a living part of his approach to policing and life. Each day presented opportunities to apply what he had internalized, and he did so with care and mindfulness. The officer began his shift early one morning, feeling a quiet sense of purpose. He reviewed his schedule, noting the areas of the city he would patrol, and prepared himself mentally for the day. Each stop, each interaction, was an opportunity to reinforce trust, fairness, and understanding. He reminded himself to remain calm, to observe carefully, and to listen fully before making judgments. The memory of the FBI agent's composed authority guided him, shaping his responses and decisions. During his first patrol, he encountered a young man riding a bicycle without a helmet. Normally, such a situation might have led to a stern warning or immediate ticketing, but today, the officer approached differently. He spoke calmly, explaining the importance of safety and offering a helmet from his patrol car for the young man to wear. The interaction was respectful and informative, and the young man thanked him sincerely. The officer felt a quiet satisfaction, recognizing that respectful engagement could be more effective than authority alone. Later, he stopped at a neighborhood park where children were playing and residents were gathering. He walked among the people, greeting them warmly and listening attentively to their concerns. A mother approached, sharing her worries about local traffic and safety. The officer took notes, assured her that the concerns would be addressed, and promised to return with updates. He felt the difference in how people responded to him now. There was trust, openness, and a willingness to engage, a reflection of the lessons he had learned from that transformative night. In the afternoon, a call came in about a minor dispute between neighbors. The officer arrived promptly, approaching the scene with calmness and measured words. He listened to both sides, ensuring that each person felt heard and understood. Through careful dialogue, he mediated the situation, helping the neighbors reach a resolution without escalation. He recognized how much his approach had changed from before, when assumptions and quick judgments might have intensified the conflict. The memory of the FBI agent's patience and composure guided his every word and action. Throughout the day, the officer reflected on the growth he had achieved. The journal he kept had become an invaluable tool, recording insights, challenges, and reminders. Reviewing it regularly allowed him to remain accountable to himself and to the community he served. Each entry reinforced the importance of fairness, empathy, and self-awareness, reminding him that every interaction mattered and that the consequences of bias could be profound. As the sun set, he returned to the station for debriefing. Supervisors noted the changes in his approach, praising his patience, communication, and respect in handling situations. Colleagues asked about his methods, curious about how he remained composed in tense circumstances. The officer shared his reflections carefully, emphasizing calm observation, clear communication, and the avoidance of assumptions. He stressed that these principles were not just techniques but a mindset, a way of approaching every interaction with humanity and integrity. In private moments, the officer continued to reflect on the encounter with the FBI agent. He considered how close the situation had come to potential danger, and how different choices could have led to disastrous outcomes. The thought was sobering, but it also reinforced his commitment to fairness and self-awareness. He understood that authority carried responsibility, and that even routine actions could profoundly impact the lives of others. This awareness guided his behavior continuously, shaping both professional and personal decisions. Community members began noticing the consistent change in the officer's approach. They appreciated the patience, respect, and fairness he displayed. And slowly, trust grew in neighborhoods where tension had once been high. The officer recognized that rebuilding trust was a long process requiring ongoing effort, honesty, and consistent behavior. Each positive interaction reinforced the lessons learned and motivated him to continue improving. During one evening patrol, The officer encountered an elderly man struggling to carry groceries across the street. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, offering assistance and walking with him to his home. The man thanked him warmly, expressing gratitude not just for the help, but for the respectful and considerate manner in which it was offered. The officer reflected on how small actions, performed with patience and respect, could make a meaningful difference in someone's life. It was a lesson in humility and humanity, reinforcing the values he had embraced since that night. The officer also took time to mentor newer recruits. He shared his experiences, emphasizing the importance of self-reflection, patience, and communication. He recounted lessons from the night with the FBI agent, focusing on the power of calm composure, respect, and fairness. His mentees listened attentively, learning not just from his words but from the behavior and attitude he consistently demonstrated. The officer understood that mentoring was an opportunity to influence future generations, promoting a culture of fairness, integrity, and empathy. As weeks turned into months, the officer noticed changes within himself beyond his professional role. His relationships with family and friends improved as he applied patience and understanding in personal interactions. He became more reflective, more empathetic, and more conscious of how his words and actions affected others. The encounter with the FBI agent had left a lasting impression, guiding his personal growth and reminding him of the importance of accountability, fairness, and humanity in all areas of life. One day, the officer received a call from a community leader requesting a discussion on improving safety and trust in the neighborhood. He attended the meeting, actively listening, taking notes, and engaging in thoughtful dialogue. Residents expressed concerns about previous encounters with law enforcement and shared suggestions for fostering better communication. The officer responded with honesty, acknowledging past mistakes and outlining proactive steps to ensure fairness and safety. The meeting ended positively, leaving both the officer and the community members with a sense of mutual respect and commitment. The officer continued documenting his experiences, reflecting on challenges, successes, and areas for improvement. His journal had become a record of growth, a tool for self-awareness and a reminder of the night that had changed everything. Each entry reinforced the values of patience, fairness, and respect, ensuring that the lessons were not forgotten or taken for granted. It was a personal commitment to continuous improvement and accountability. During routine patrols, the officer noticed that the calm and respectful approach often de-escalated potential conflicts before they arose. Individuals responded more positively to clear communication and measured actions. The officer realized that assumptions and quick judgments were often the root of tension, and by consciously avoiding them, he could foster safer, more constructive interactions. The memory of the FBI agent's composed demeanor remained a guide, a model for how authority could be exercised responsibly and humanely. The officer also reflected on the broader implications of bias and prejudice in law enforcement. He understood that systemic change required both personal growth and institutional support. He engaged in discussions with supervisors and colleagues about training, community engagement, and policy improvements. His insights, grounded in personal experience, contributed to a culture of reflection and responsibility within the department. He recognized that meaningful change was gradual, but every effort mattered. In quieter moments, he considered the courage of the FBI agent that night. Remaining calm under scrutiny, demonstrating professionalism despite provocation, and asserting authority with respect were qualities that required immense discipline and self-control. The officer admired these traits and integrated them into his approach, understanding that true strength lay not in aggression or dominance, but in measured, respectful action. As the year progressed, the officer noticed tangible improvements in the community's response to law enforcement. Residents approached him with questions, concerns, and suggestions. They acknowledged his efforts to engage respectfully and fairly. The officer recognized that trust was not built overnight, but through consistent, deliberate actions rooted in empathy and fairness. He felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing the positive impact of his efforts, understanding that accountability and growth were ongoing processes. He continued mentoring new recruits, emphasizing that respect, calmness, and fairness were essential tools, not just professional skills. He shared strategies for maintaining composure, communicating clearly, and avoiding assumptions. He stressed that authority carried responsibility, and that the way officers interacted with the public could have lasting consequences. His guidance was grounded in personal experience, reinforcing lessons learned through real-life challenges. In reflecting on his journey, the officer acknowledged that mistakes were inevitable, but growth and learning were deliberate choices. The night with the FBI agent had been a pivotal moment, demonstrating how composure, respect, and fairness could prevent escalation and create understanding. That single encounter had shaped his approach, transforming not only his professional behavior, but also his personal outlook, teaching him lessons that would remain with him for a lifetime. The officer concluded that authority, when exercised with patience and empathy, could foster trust and cooperation rather than fear and resentment. Each encounter became an opportunity to practice these principles, ensuring that fairness guided every decision. The lessons of that night were no longer abstract. They were the foundation of his identity as an officer and as a person. As the year drew to a close, the officer walked the same streets where he had first encountered the FBI agent. Reflecting on the journey since that night, the city had not changed, but he had. Each step was now informed by awareness, empathy, and a commitment to integrity. He understood that growth was ongoing, but he felt prepared to face future challenges with calmness, fairness, and respect, knowing that the lessons learned would continue to guide his actions and decisions, both on duty and in life.